Hello, everyone, and today we are talking about. Have you ever wondered how a bill becomes a law? Well, maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Maybe you've seen the video from, well, when I was a child. Hey there! Maybe you have seen the video of when a little cartoon Bill went to Capitol Hill to see if he could get made into a law from maybe a few years ago. I may have been a child when that came about. Or maybe you've been wondering why things can't get done in Congress. Either way, or maybe both, maybe it would interest you to know how a bill becomes a law. We are going to talk about that today, and hopefully you'll at least have some clarity about how difficult it is for a bill to become a law. And with that knowledge, you'll be better equipped to advocate for what laws you want to see get made. So this is an overview of how laws are made, and this is in a lot of depth, and there's a lot of information in here that really your average everyday citizen probably doesn't need on an ongoing basis. But it's a really great overview, and it comes with a lot of good information about how to look at the code of the bill, so how you read a bill's bill number, where it starts from, where the bill, the bill number, what session it's in, all of that. But for people who don't really want to read the Federal Register all day, that's where they keep all the information about the goings-on of government, sometimes this is a bit overwhelming and a bit too much. So we're going to go and zoom out a little bit and pick up on the key elements of this that you might find interesting and relevant, and then allow you to come back to this with a little more knowledge and understanding of how to pick into those parts that you find more important for what you're doing. For this, we are going to pick one chamber that we're starting in. And for this exercise, we're going to pick the House of Representatives. A bill does not, except in certain circumstances, have to originate in the House of Representatives. Those circumstances being mostly having to do with budget. But for our purposes, it allows us to discuss some of the nuances of the House of Representatives in a more formal way. So we're going to pick the House of Representatives to start with. Step one, which you'll see down here in the corner, is that a bill has to be introduced by a sponsor. That means that a member of Congress, in this case a member of the House of Representatives, has to write, or really have staff write, the bill and has to sponsor its introduction in the chamber. Now, there can be multiple members that are sponsoring a bill, and when you have multiple members sponsoring a bill, especially if that's a bipartisan sponsored bill, it does show a broader coalition and greater support for the bill. So, depending on what you're trying to show with the sponsorship, that may signal something based on who's sponsoring the bill. The next stop on the road here is the bill gets referred to committee. Now, referred to committee should really be referred to committees, because many bills are referred to multiple committees and then are referred down to subcommittees within those committees. In the House, the Speaker or his designate refers the bill to committees to be heard and to be marked up and to be dealt with at that level. The art of the multiple referral has grown over time, and that means that a bill, let's say on busing, for schools can go both to a transportation committee and an education committee for workup and markup. Speaking of markup, that's step 3. Broadly, this term is either given committee work or committee markup, but this contains many different things. So committees can first take the work on themselves or subdivide the work amongst their subcommittees, because every committee has their own subcommittees underneath them. Most committees do, I should say. They can hold hearings where they bring in experts to testify. They can bring in the sponsors of the bill to testify about the bill. They can have work sessions where they actually say, we want to strike out this language or add this language. And eventually, if they're going to move the bill forward, they have to vote on it. And it has to get approved out of those committees that it's in order to make its way back to the main chamber. So you can imagine that if it's referred out to multiple committees, I should say, that it's got to get voted on by those committees to come back out. Now, when you are referred out to multiple committees that are different, not subcommittees within a committee, the potential for conflicting language can come into play here. So there does need to be some sort of way that work can be done to make sure that the language is the same, because whatever comes back to the floor needs to reflect a singular bill, not multiple bills. It's not a pick and choose. Once a bill is ready to come out to the main floor, it goes first to this Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee has a long and storied history within the House. There is a Rules Committee in the Senate. It just doesn't play the kind of same central role that it does in the House. But in the House, what happens is that the Rules Committee determines how a bill is going to be heard, debated, amended, etc., while it's on the floor of the House. And so its time in that Rules Committee is really important, because that determines everything that happens from there on out for that bill. This committee is largely controlled by the Speaker of the House, and the determinations about how these things happen are really integral for the success or failure of the bill moving forward. So once a bill comes back to the floor, and remember, it hasn't been there since it's been introduced, it often looks very different. And the first thing that gets voted on isn't the bill itself, but it is that rule that comes out of the Rules Committee about how the bill should be discussed. And again, this is in the House how this gets done, but there's a similar process that happens in the Senate. So the Rules Committee's rule gets voted on first, and then the bill itself is considered based on that rule. It is up to the Speaker's discretion when this gets on the calendar for the House. And as you can imagine, because the Speaker is a member of a party, depending on what the bill is about and its priority within partisan politics, that really makes a difference as to when things get scheduled. If the bill fails to pass here, it's dead. It's not going to go to the other chamber. It's not going to go to the president. It's dead. And that is, barring any kind of unforeseen special circumstances to the contrary. Now, if it passes, then it gets transmitted to the other chamber, in this case, the Senate. And it goes through the same cycle of things. It gets referred out to committees. It goes through committee markup. It gets brought back to the floor. And it gets put on the calendar by the Senate Majority Leader, or sometimes through other processes that exist in the Senate, because the Senate has some unique processes. There are kind of three potential big outcomes here, if the bill makes it out of committees at all. One is the bill dies. And if the bill dies either in committee or it fails to pass, then it's dead. Just like if it hadn't passed the House. One other potential outcome is that the bill passes in the exact same form that it passed in the House. And then a final potential is that the bill passes in a different form. So if the bill dies, we've kind of dealt with that. No need to go into that further. If the bill passes in the same form, that's kind of the easiest outcome, because it goes to the president for signature, as long as it's in exactly the same form. I mean, down to the letter, to the punctuation, everything. It can go directly to the president for signature at that point. But if there are any differences in how those bills look, then there's going to be some sort of work that needs to be done. Now, the historical way to do this is through a conference committee where you get members of the House, members of the Senate, and they work out a compromise that both chambers have to vote on. What tends to happen these days is one of two things. One is some sort of other type of negotiation without pulling together, a formal conference committee. The other is that the House can see what the Senate passed and just vote on the Senate version and approve that. So they can say, we see what you did. You took out a couple of things or added a couple of things. We're just going to go ahead and vote on that one. They approve it, and then that's the one that moves forward in the exact same format. So there's kind of a few different ways to deal with that, but the big picture takeaway here is that it has to be in the exact same form before it goes to the president. Once it goes to the president can sign it, and it becomes a law. Hooray! But there's one potential roadblock, and that is the president can veto a bill. If both chambers pass a bill, the president still has the option to veto it. That is one power of the presidency. And Congress has a few options there. The first is Congress can choose to override a veto. And overriding a veto is something that doesn't happen often, but it does happen. You can imagine why it doesn't happen often, that the Congress gets together to override a veto. And it's because you need 2/3 of both chambers to vote together to override what the president said. And we just don't see a lot of members of Congress voting together like that. Option B is that both chambers can work together to modify the bill to satisfy the president in some way and then repass it in that version so the president will sign it. Option C is that you can enter into some negotiations with the president. Leaders from both chambers can negotiate. Maybe the president agrees to sign the bill if Congress agrees to do something on something different, an unrelated item. And maybe that's with or without modifications on the bill in question. And then option D, which is what is most likely going to happen, is that the bill dies. The president's veto stands, the bill dies, and that's the end of that. So as you can see, every step along the way has so much built into it that can lead to a bill failing. And it's such a hurdle at each point that it's, when we think about Congress not getting things done, we're kind of mad, and rightfully so. But at the same time, when we look at the process, it's kind of understandable why things don't get done. One theory about this, which probably will sound very reasonable once we've now gone through this, is the idea of pivotal lawmaking. And this is the idea that lawmaking depends on all of these pivots in the system. And pivots are really these points where you have to get over a hurdle, right? And where there are these actors that can block change. And that's because all of these pivots represent a place where you need a super majority. You can't just get 50% plus one to agree. You need 2/3, 3/5, etc. So the presidential veto is a good example of that, but there are others. The Senate, as you may heard of, has a filibuster, at least as of the moment that still stands for legislation, which means you need to get at least 60 senators to agree not to hold up a bill. And then there are some others we'll talk about in just a second here. You also have the fact that many of our members of Congress have different preferences and come from different areas of the country, and so their preferences are different not just because of themselves individually, but who they represent. So gridlock in Congress, which irritates us all, occurs because there is a preference for moderate status quo policies that results from these pivot points. The only thing you can get over these hurdles are kind of things that everybody agrees to. And winning coalitions have to be bipartisan and have to have supermajorities, right? You can't just get 50% plus one. You need to get 60 to 70% at least. So these pivot points start from the very beginning. When you're trying to get something through a committee, you need that kind of person who's in the middle. If you spread them all out along ideological lines, you need that person who's the median member to agree with you and everybody else along your side, right? So you need to get everybody lined up, at least that far, and to go with you on that bill. Now, that may not go along party lines, although quite often it does these days. But you need to get that median member. And the same thing in both chambers of Congress. You need to get that median member to agree with you. You can't just get a simple majority. In the Senate, you need to have enough people to overcome the filibuster. When the president vetoes, you have to have enough people to overcome the veto. And the president himself acts as a veto. So visually, here's how it works. In Congress, you have both the committee level and at the chamber level, you have the median member. And if you don't get the median member and everybody else, you get gridlock. But if you do, then you can take that to the Senate. Let's say you start in the House, you can take it to the Senate. But if you get filibustered, then you're out, gridlock again. If you are able then to get everybody on board, so no filibuster, right? You've gotten 60 people on board. Then you get to the president, who has either the ability to sign, and so you have a new policy, or that veto, right? A literal veto point. And then Congress, with a veto, can basically say, we accept, or can try and override to get to a new policy. But it is only with either the president signing after overcoming these hurdles or Congress overriding after coming the presidential veto that you get to a new policy. And that's a pretty high bar. Now, a lot of things make it over that bar, but a lot of things don't. And so I think we need to kind of understand this to better understand why policy doesn't change in big, dramatic ways, but also to understand what it does take to move members of Congress through this process. So as you think about the policy process, as you think about the lawmaking process, it's not enough to just know each step. It's really important to know all of these potential points at which there can be blockages and gridlock along the way. I hope that helps you better understand how a bill becomes a law. And if you do remember the old Schoolhouse Rock, maybe bill will eventually one day truly become a law. Thanks.